Hello, everybody. Welcome back to What Self Care Looks Like. I am Brittany Elliott, and I am your self care and mom life coach, here to help you prioritize your needs and practice self care in a meaningful way so that you can reclaim joy in your motherhood experience. And today we have a guest. We have Carrie Brummer here with us. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. So, I am going to read Carrie's bio for everybody, and then we're going to have a really good and fun, intentional conversation. I'm really excited. So, Carrie is a virtual artist and has had work displayed in short term exhibitions at the Smithsonian and the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. So, you're a big deal. Her artist practice is about elevating women, highlighting and addressing gender norms and perfectionism. It's recently looked at motherhood and how it intersects with these issues. As part of Artist Strong, Carrie helps creatives identify mindset blocks, build their skill, and develop their unique artist voice. Her book, Art Speak, empowers artists to talk about their art. Her program, Self Taught and Self Confident, helps artists build their skill and confidence to finally explore their unique style and voice. Carrie is a newish mom to a strong, smart 4-year-old, a fur mom to a doodle that's more Muppet than dog, and currently lives in Houston, Texas, after 13 years in the Middle East and Canada. When she's not playing board games with her husband, she's baking, reading, and making her own art. And I do all that except for the art stuff, I think. So, welcome.
Well, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's so nice to be in conversation on such an important topic, and I'm so grateful I get to share my perspective.
I'm so excited to have you and to just give our listeners a little bit of backstory. I was on a mission to find other women who came into motherhood maybe without that as their intention, or maybe were perhaps on the fence about motherhood, maybe just
Mhm.
not, made certain, because I feel like a lot of what we hear about motherhood is like it's just all this joy and it's beautiful, and what woman would not want to be a mother? And what life has proven to me is that not all of us are just out here just really focused on
Right.
motherhood. So can you tell us all a little bit more about your experience with that?
Yes. I consciously chose to be child free for 8 years of my marriage, maybe closer to 10. I don't remember the exact number. And I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to have a child or children. And I distinctly remember while I was living overseas, I briefly had a stint as an assistant principal, and we ended up moving for my husband's job. And three women came to me in a single day and were like, "So you're going to have babies now that you're leaving your job?" And it was just like, I kind of was offended and triggered by that. I was like, no, I can be defined by many things in my life. And so there was this, I don't know. I feel like I already had internalized the pressures that I saw that mothers faced and also the expectations our society puts on mothers. And I did not want that.
Mm,
And that fear around those pressures, knowing that I lean perfectionist. I like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist now, but I think it is work you just always are doing. And I that really made me go nope. And additionally, I had a sister. Well, I have a sister, but she waited for 8 to 10 years to have children herself. So I had this example of I don't have to rush into this, and I can have time for career, for my art, for other things important to me. And I was enjoying my life. I lived in Dubai, and then I was in Muscat, Oman. I moved to Canada with my husband. I was exploring the world and doing really fun, I feel like I made memories, and I
mm,
was really proud of that, and I had a strong sense of identity. So we were talking about children because it was starting to be an issue of biology. Like if we wanted to conceive children ourselves, we needed to make a committed decision either way. And we had kind of avoided that. We weren't 100% sure. And again, I think it was because we both felt this daunting pressure of what it was going to mean to be a parent, and this messaging that I had received that I was going to lose myself and
mm.
not have an identity anymore outside of being a mom, and that I had to give everything up to be a mom. And all of that was really just overwhelming to me. So, we started to reach a point where we're like, okay, we were in Canada, we were a little more settled. And we're like, maybe we should give it a go. And really, without much effort, we were very fortunate. Things just worked out, and we conceived very quickly. And then my husband got a job transfer to Texas, so we came to Texas pregnant. And then my daughter was born in March of 2020.
What a time.
Yeah.
What a
So, we had, I mean, there's so many things I could talk about here, but there was the transition of being a mother, which I had grown into. Like, I was excited about it, but I also had this very, being in a high achiever, I had this very clear vision in my head of what this was going to look like, which,
Mhm.
of course, your vision of what parenthood is going to be or how you're going to be able to manage your time, you can't know until you are a parent. But, there is like a naivety and optimism that comes, I think, during pregnancy at times that I was definitely channeling. But also, our expectations were completely dashed by the pandemic. My
Yes.
in-laws are Canadian. They couldn't enter the country to offer support, right? My mom and sister live in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're in Houston, Texas. It's a 2-day drive. We weren't going to have anyone fly and risk that coming to us. And so we ended up being this little bubble when our daughter was born. And the blessing that happened was my husband had taken about a month off of work to be home, but also then his company went completely virtual.
Mm.
And so the first year of her life, he was way more present than he would have been without the pandemic. So like that was like the one plus that came from it. And also just his partnership and being a team together and caring for this infant was super important. But also, we didn't have family meet her until she was 8 months old. And then our other set of family didn't meet her until she was over a year old. So there was this like isolation, just the like overwhelm of parenting is hard for anyone. And I think being new parents, choosing to be parents later in life, in our like late 30s, early 40s, all these things just kind of like built on each other. And I was really, there was struggle, and I knew that there was going to be a transition, but I am confident that our situation was kind of compounded by the issues of the pandemic, and that sense of isolation and being alone and not being in conversation with people about being a new parent and having that kind of community element, really made me feel, I mean, I keep saying alone, but that's, I just, even with a spouse who is very present and really taking, like helping with feeding and like all of the stuff, I just still felt so disconnected and within myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so my art has always been part of who I am. And I had a lot of fear about like, will I be able to make art? Can I still be an artist after I'm a mother? Like how am I going to make time for this? And
Mhm.
ultimately what I found was I had to change my materials because I couldn't pull out paint as easily. I was worried about things drying, so I pulled out colored pencils because it's something I'd always enjoyed working with. And I just was like, I feel like a puppet.
Mm.
So I found images online of a marionette, and I found some photo references of myself where I had taken a picture of myself, like a selfie with me and my daughter, and she was 7 months at the time in that photo. And I drew myself as that puppet, and I call it Self-Portrait at 7 months. And it was like the first time I could articulate some of the disconnect I was feeling, kind of the loss of identity, and also just express myself when I didn't have the words. I was so tired and disconnected and overwhelmed. I couldn't articulate all of these things, and I
Right.
probably would have just cried. Like I didn't have words at the time, but my art was this vehicle through which I could start sharing. And I don't know why, but I just threw that image up on my Facebook, just to share with family and friends. And I was stunned by the number of women who privately messaged me saying, pandemic or no pandemic, Carrie, we have all felt this way.
Mm.
And that was kind of this moment of connection and community, being like, oh, I'm not alone in this feeling. And it made me realize how important this conversation is to have, because I think so many of us deal with like the high achieving perfectionist beliefs that we suffer in silence, and then everyone's suffering in silence because we all are like, oh well, they look like they have it together, and I was like, okay, I think it's important for me to use my art now as a vehicle to continue this conversation and invite more primary caregivers into this dialogue. And I really feel like all of that's connected, like my choice to be child free for so long, and then kind of stumbling into parenthood kind of quickly and easily, but also then the difficulty of the pandemic, these were all kind of layers that contributed to the moment of like that drawing, and then my decision to move forward with my work.
And it's so great that you had a medium through which to create that message, because I find a lot, especially in the work that I do, is that there is still this obstacle to and really just a discomfort with talking about that side of motherhood, because there is a lot of backlash. We do get a lot of backlash when we come, especially in this social media type of world, when we're saying, hey, I love my child and I hate the motherhood experience. And that's how I explained it now. My daughter, she's 6 now, and I've overcome that hump of it. But still, if someone specifically said to me, like a pointed question, like, what's the most joyful part of motherhood? I'd say the child, because
Yes.
everything else is, it's a lot, because it's
Yeah.
not just, the relationship, it's everything else. It's the pressures, it's those gender norms, it's everything that flows. It's the ebbs and flows of that. And I think that although women have come so far in life in terms of things, we still do not want to be berated by others for speaking about, I don't know, the dark side of motherhood. Because to me, while so many of us are talking about it, there's so many people who would dare not say anything beyond that. And they accuse us of not being fully invested as mothers if we are saying anything other than, this is the greatest thing that happened to me. So how do you use art to really break down that barrier to be able to express this part of motherhood and that other part?
uh, Basically, once I realized I could use like drawing and other materials to start to express different ideas, and that it was easy to pick up and put down, I realized that that was like an inherent part of my practice, is being a mother and how my time is so interrupted. And embroidery has always been an art medium that I also explore. And for whatever reason, I kept the used cloth diapers that I used with my daughter. So during the day, I used pre-folds, and then at night, she just had regular diapers. But I kept all those diapers, and I'm like, I think I'm going to embroider into them. And I had no idea what I was going to do with them. But then basically, that exactly what you're saying. It was like I kept hearing the phrase savor every moment. And she was definitely under 7 months old at the time. I was barely sleeping. The breastfeeding, the labor of breastfeeding. I
Mm.
had low milk supply, so we were breastfeeding and doing formula. Like just like all of the labor that we all know. And I was like, if one more person says savor every moment to me, I'm going to punch them through the nose. Like I'm gonna, like hit them through the screen, because it was all on, it was all on like Zoom
Yeah.
or Face, whatever. I was like, I'm gonna just like hit that screen and just be like, we're done with this. Like I don't want to have this conversation. It is not savor every moment. I am allowed to be upset or tired or cranky. It's like I was not allowed to express all of who I am and my feelings. And
Mhm.
what example is that to my daughter? Like, was part of also what was in my head. So I was like, I'm using those used cloth diapers, and I am embroidering a beautiful, like embroidery, the way like I think of it, like my aunt gave me a beautiful embroidery when my daughter was born. So I think
Mhm.
of like aunties or like grandmothers making this beautiful embroidery to gift us when our child is born. So I did these like beautiful flowers, and in beautiful, beautiful writing, I wrote savor every moment on
Mm.
this used cloth diaper. And I realized this is like part of the dialogue I'm trying to encourage others to. So I'm going to do like 50 to 100 of them. I want them all mounted on one wall. So from a distance, they'll look like they're beautifully framed the way a traditional embroidery would be. But when you get closer, you see that they're on stained used cloth diapers, for
Wow.
that irony of like, maybe it's not all sunshine. And tied to this, like that's kind of the personal work of mine. I was like, I can invite other women into this. And so this part is still in development,
Okay.
but the hope is to, like we have such a strong history and tradition of women coming together to do craft work like embroidery or quilting. And I thought, why couldn't I invite small groups of women together to embroider something? I can teach embroidery, embroider a small word or phrase that helps them reclaim the fullness of their parenting experience. And so that is kind of the next step of this, trying to invite more people into this conversation and honor that duality and make more people feel permission to be in conversation around this without that judgment that I really think comes from a lot of women not even realizing they have a choice to feel differently.
Yeah.
And I really think, even though it's hard and uncomfortable when women might say, well, I never felt that way, like, okay, well, good for you. Like I have, and I am not going to um, diminish myself anymore. Even if there's still like feeling of shame or guilt, like I can honor that in myself and go, it's okay to feel this way, but also I'm aware that it's not me that feels this way. This is those expectations that I feel like I'm not adhering to. And I feel like that separation is important. And so for me, this art can be a way to start that conversation without it, again, just being like me talking face to face with someone being like, you're allowed to feel this way. I think having this kind of ritual experience where we're together in a small group, I'm kind of hoping to keep it to like 6 women at a time, where we can embroider something. They can choose words themselves. I'll show them the process. And ultimately, I really hope to have a group show where I invite these women who are not artists to share their embroidered work in a community space to help others be invited into that conversation, and have kind of other elements there. So I guess the other part, there's so much, I feel like there's so much to say, so just interrupt me if I'm yammering on here. But
No, this is great.
uh, the other thing that's kind of came up from this is I do feel like some women don't feel permission to say what they want to out loud. So I've also created an Instagram account. It's called Primary Caregiver Art. There's an underscore between each name, but there's an anonymous form people can fill out in the bio there, where I ask you to finish the phrase, I am a primary caregiver, dot, dot, dot.
Mm.
Like I am a primary caregiver, period, I dot dot dot, finish the sentence. And people can yeah, you can fill that out anonymously, and then I'm sharing that on that Instagram account. And it's been interesting to see the variety of people's responses. I'm keeping the definition of primary caregiver pretty open, so there
Yeah.
are some people who are talking about it in terms of caregiving for their adult parents as well. But like one that really stuck with me was, I sometimes resent my husband for,
Yeah.
the time that he has or something like that. And so I feel like this is hopefully another means, like I see that account as an art form too, in that it's this opportunity to share voices that are not mine, but other people hopefully sharing their varied experiences to, again, like normalize this conversation so that we can start asking ourselves, well, what if it doesn't have to be that way? Like, what could it look like? That's something I really like that I listened to in several of your podcasts, is this, like, we don't have to feel bad. Like, we can choose, like, what if we could build the life that accommodates the people we are and gets to celebrate and embrace those things? And I think it's so hard to have that conversation if we don't feel permission to fully express the difficulties we face as parents as well.
Yeah. And that was so eloquently put, because much there's so much nuance to the motherhood experience. And some of it is the mothering part, some of it is our upbringing, some of it is being a high achiever. There are so many things that go into it. And so when you just create a method for communication for people to just bring in and kind of dump as you're doing, you can start to curate conversations to these deeper elements of what is going on, because I truly feel that us as, people, as humans, we are so interconnected. So I don't think one person's experience is ever completely unique from someone else's.
Right.
We all are interwoven, and that, but we can't always find it and we can't always call upon it. So I love what you're doing there. And another thing I really appreciate about you, Carrie, is that you knew going into it, because you had heard that you could lose yourself in this,
Mhm.
and you keeping your identity was very much important to you. So when you saw yourself at 7 months, you didn't say, oh, well, this is just the cost of motherhood and that's that, and went on your way and kept whatever you were feeling. You took action. So can you tell me a little bit more about how that felt for you, and how you maintain your sense of identity through your motherhood journey.
Oh, yes. Such a good question. I I think because going into parenthood, I already had such concerns around identity. I was very much thinking about how do I maintain that and feel like I still get to be me in some way. Also, understanding that a lot of my identity historically had been tied to my professional performance,
Mm.
like being a school teacher in school systems for I forgot how many years at that point. I think I'd been a teacher for like 8 or 9 years, and then I got promoted to assistant principal, and I like felt like I was kind of doing all the career things I was supposed to, and then I left it for moving for my husband's job and started teaching art online. But even then, like the work was so heavily tied to who I was that was kind of an unraveling, even with the expectation of me trying to figure out who I was. And I'm grateful for that, because I think again that's problematic. Like, why our identity shouldn't be only about our work or our performance. Like, we're valuable without those things. And I don't know that I would have really come to that realization without kind of being forced into like stay at home mom situation for quite a while with the pandemic. And I don't know, I felt compulsed to make my work. And so that was just the channel through which I could start to express myself. And because there was no question in my mind that I could give that up, it became, how do I do it in a way that suits the life I now live? I think that kind of like flexibility forced me to think about my own resilience as a mother and as a person. And I knew I would be resentful if I didn't take at least some time for myself. And even with a little bit of time, I could still feel that at times, because I just felt like all the free time I had to do and explore all these things that I had. I'm so, like, I have like rich interior life and I want time for that. And, but also, it was actually helpful for me to think about it like this is a season that I'm in parenthood. Like, she's going to grow more independent. And not to savor the moment, but to also understand that it's a season and I can adjust and respond as these seasons shift. And that also kind of let me relax a little bit, because like now I'm realizing like in a year she's going to school. That's going to open up a whole different time frame for me for my time and the work that I do online and my art, and thinking about what that's going to mean, right? So I think it's really important to like remember when we're drowning in kind of, especially like the early years of like the early year of infant life,
Mm.
that it's not forever. It's okay to ask for help. Even if you only have your partner to ask for help for, it's okay to get additional help. I sought counseling because I was struggling and I knew I needed someone outside of my partner to also offer me support. I think there's like a self-awareness that I have, and I really hope more people can try to cultivate in themselves, like through journaling or even just taking a few minutes before the start of the day to ask, like, what do I need today? Even if it's something really small. And I think that's kind of just been part of my parenting experience, and comes a little bit from that like old elder mother, like
Yeah.
having so much time to know myself before I became a mom. And also, my sister's 16 years older than I am. So her kids are actually closer in age to me than I am to my sister. And so I got to watch her raise her children and how my parents raised us. And so I had these two very different examples of what it meant to be a mother. Cause
Mm.
she's like, she did her like stay home period and she had to get back to work as fast as she could. She was like alphabetizing her spice rack after 6 weeks. Like, I got to go back to work, like that's just my sister. And she made me feel permission to know myself in that way too. She was like, I couldn't stay home. That's not something I want to do for those early years. And my mom stayed home. And so I had both of those examples. And so I felt permission, but then I almost felt pressure to be both because of cultural norms too. But I do feel like that's kind of, I guess ultimately that's what I'm talking about when I talk about like owning that identity of myself, is like I could see that women made other choices and they were comfortable with them. So then it made me curious, like what's going to make me comfortable. And so I think that self-reflection was really important to being able to start developing and testing boundaries. I can't say it was perfect from the start, and it still isn't.
Right.
It is this evolving thing with my family in their life too.
And the self-awareness that you mentioned is so important in the coaching space and a lot of the work that we do. We know that not everyone has that. And that's why I always recommend to people get a therapist, get a coach, get a mentor, someone who is not way notches above you, but is even two levels up, to where you're going, to where the path doesn't seem like so daunting, but so that
Yeah.
they've been where you are and they're taking the next steps. Because when you are in it, so for me, in my pregnancy experience, that was different from yours. I didn't even have joy through that. I was someone who just, it's now looking back, it's very hard for me to be like, I didn't want to be a mother. I just didn't plan for it. And I also
Right.
didn't think I would be a good mother. So it was not something that was on my radar, not something that I was planning. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I had a hard time. And I spent my entire pregnancy stressed out about it because I'm like, okay, now you're in it. Now you have to be responsible. So then it's like, okay, now at pregnancy, what can I do to protect this child and make sure they have a nice place to come after that? And then also afterwards, I was panicking. Like, what did I do? Now the baby is here. And now I really have to like
Yeah. Now
get
what?
things together. But then I was falling apart, like mentally, just the change, the emotions. And then, my husband and I, we were like in a new relationship when we found out that we were pregnant. And luckily that worked out, right? But we were getting to know each other too. And so we've known each other as parents basically like our entire relationship, which is not a normal thing. Um, and so you and your husband having this conversation and making this shift in your lives and saying, "Hey, I think we should do this. I'm cool. I'm cool with it happening or it not happening.
Yes.
Let's try and see what happens." And then the baby comes. Can you tell me more about the collaboration that you had with your husband even through that time?
You know, well, I mean, we moved when I was like 12 weeks pregnant from Canada to Texas, right? So I feel like that was the start of the collaboration because while I wasn't showing or anything, like it was too early at 8 weeks to like go to a doctor in Canada and like get the checkup. And but we did. We went and like was like, do I do an ultrasound now? And they're like, honestly, you should probably just wait and be a few weeks later than you should be, or whatever, and get an OB in Texas. And so, like we're driving 4 days from Ottawa,
Mm,
Canada to Houston, Texas. And it's like, I have no idea if I'm going to have to go to the bathroom every 15 minutes, like I just don't even know how I'm going to feel. Right. And from the beginning, we just kind of set that tone and expectation, like this is going to take time. We had a dog, we have a dog, and he's my first child in so many ways. So we were like already having to accommodate and think about the drive for the dog, which actually kind of helped being pregnant because we had to stop a lot and things like that. But so like we were already in conversation of like, okay, what does my body need right now? How tired am I? Some of that. He also knows like how important like fitness or like my own headspace time is, which is one reason I'm an artist. It's like this individual kind of solo activity. And excuse me, I just felt like he made space for that. Like when we moved there, he's like, did you find a yoga studio for any like classes that you want to take? Like just like really encouraging during the pregnancy process. So I didn't feel alone because I was excited, but I had a lot of nerves
mhm.
because it kind of happened so fast and in like unexpectedly quickly kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just felt permission to feel all those things. I didn't really need him to like come to appointments with me or anything. Like if he was working, I kind of was okay with that. But we like consciously took some classes together, make sure we kind of knew things for the hospital and labor. We talked about what we wanted labor to look like. And then we even talked about after, how are we going to handle things like feeding at night? Like we prepared before the baby was born. And I said, like, I do want to breastfeed, but I want you to be able to feed too, because I mean, one, it's a bonding experience.
Yeah.
And two, like, I want to share this labor. Like, it's going to be hard. And so, like, we already had agreed, like, if there were going to be two feedings a night, I would do one and he would do the other because that would help our sleep. And some of this, evolved as we actually were putting it into practice and realized the logistics. I think initially we were like, oh, we'll each take one night. And then we just realized no one was getting enough sleep then. And we were too sleep deprived. Where if we each woke up once a night, more or less, that then, we'd both maybe get 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And so I feel very fortunate that he was in conversation with me the whole time and could listen. I wouldn't say he instigated these conversations, but he's willing to engage in them and be curious. And I had an emergency C-section after laboring for like 10 or 12 hours. And so I couldn't get up off the couch by myself, so he had to literally be there to help me get up and down for several weeks after our emergency C-section too. So with the pandemic. So all of that immediately forced him into like a taking initiative role, since I couldn't get up and move around and just start taking things on. And I think that really helped us from the start. Um,
Yeah. And I
hmm,
think you two obviously had a really good foundation to your relationship, and you were able to support one another, and you just know each other so well. And I think that, for our listeners, even if that's not the case, one thing I would recommend, and Cerise Holly, who we had on as a guest, I don't know how long ago now. But, she said to me, it would be great if you like talk to expectant mothers, or, people
mm,
prior to prepare them for what may come down. And I was telling her, well, it's really, kind of like, because you don't want to put fear. You don't want to instill fear in an expectant mother who doesn't have hesitations already.
yeah.
But on the other side of that, we are also sold that once we have our child, don't worry about it, because your maternal instinct will kick in and you
Yes.
will just know what to do. And the truth is, you don't. I did not know any more than my husband knew when my daughter came into this world. And it sounds to me that you had clarity around that, and like you and your husband had talked about, we're going to learn how to do this together. So if you could just tell us how that has kind of blossomed, since now your daughter is 4. So with the last 4 years, how has that been, you two growing through this parenting experience together?
Great question. I I would say I'm the default parent for sure. And part of it is because I just am the person who takes initiative in the relationship and was prior to having a child. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, one of the first things we realized is I can't default to like jumping in to just doing all the things anymore. And I'd start to get irritable because of course I was doing too much.
Yeah.
And that became the like little warning sign, like, oh wait, like this isn't working. And so then I could go like, I really can't do this all. Like you need to do this, or I need you to take on this. And he'd get curious and figure out ways for us to make it work. The best example I have actually in terms of him willing to just jump in is when I was pregnant. I had my first solo exhibition for my art, and it was in Canada after we had already moved to Texas. So I had to like make sure a bunch of my work was already there. I packed a bunch of work on a plane with me to bring it to install it, and I was allowed to fly there for the exhibition, but I could not fly back to uninstall the show because I was too pregnant. So my husband took time off work and flew by himself to Canada to take down the whole art show and bring the artwork home for me. And and for me, like that, I think symbolically helped just set the tone of like, if I ask or I can't do something, like I know I need to tell him. Like he can't read my mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we all tend to do, but like I really saw that. Like when I articulated my needs, then he could be responsive. And I do think sometimes that becomes part of the default parent problem too, is like we shouldn't always have to um some of that could be emotional labor, I guess you could argue, so like that could be a different conversation maybe, but
Mhm.
I do think all of us articulating our needs is important. Something that we both agreed on that we had seen a friend do is she and her partner, they each have one night a week. They actually each have 2 nights a week where they go do something by themselves.
Mm.
And their partner takes the nights that they're not. And then the weekends are family. And we were like, okay, I don't know that we can do 2 nights, but we can each have one night a week where we get something for ourselves. And so that was kind of already a tone set. With the pandemic, that obviously didn't quite play
It's
out,
tough.
but like
Yeah.
now that is definitely in place. Like we both love board games. Like he'll go gaming, once a week. I might go, I usually like try to take time for my art essentially, or I have like a meetup with a friend to see something art related, things like that. And so just like cultivating some schedule stuff that gives us some of those needs met, because we both are more introverted and kind of want that time, I think has been really important and made us both more receptive to each other's feedback. Like, hey, like, that pile of laundry, like it's not going to go away. Someone needs to fold it, like some
Yeah.
of that other stuff that maybe isn't the priority, but eventually has to get done. And I do think that's just been part of it, is I have to let go and not try to have a perfectly clean house. Like it's just not going to happen right now, and that's okay. And by relaxing it, sometimes that means my partner actually shows up and does more of it, because I haven't tried to like be so on top of things that everything's like immaculate and put together, because if I did that, I would just fall apart, because I would have no time for anything else in my life. And that, I guess, sense of priority, which I do like listen to a podcast from you recently about priorities, and like figuring out what your priorities are. I thought that was great. I think that's been important to our conversation. Like, okay, we both need a day a week where we have something that's not about parenting.
Yeah.
And then on the weekends, we kind of have a tag teaming way of approaching parenting time. So if we both need some time to do some chores or some other things, we can do that. And yeah, I think it's been organic, but it's also been very conscious of, again, me articulating my needs and also getting curious, like, what do you need? Are you feeling, that
Yeah.
you have what you need? How are our needs being met as a couple? Like, I might instigate those conversations just because that's the dynamic of our relationship, but that conversation has been important for us to, I think, both feel permission to show up fully.
Yeah. And that's such a good point that you talk about the dynamic of your relationship, because parenting reveals the dynamic that was already there. So when people get into, I'm the default parent, I carry so much of the cognitive labor, I do all this, you most likely were doing that the whole time
Yes.
and didn't have the stress of a child, because with work and everything else, and even with your art, you could say, I'm just not going to do this today. I've been peopling too much today and I'm just going to kick up my feet. Well, when you have a 2-year old, 3-year old, 16-year old, even, that's not an option. So you get tired out way quicker. And so a lot of the work that even I do is like, let's talk about your relationship and the dynamic that is there, because you are attributing a lot of things to motherhood and mothering. But it's really just, this is how your relationship has been. And now your needs have changed. And that's
Yes.
really all that has happened. And I feel like you have grasped that, and you are both just working through that so beautifully. And I love that you check in with one another. So many parallels with my husband and I. We did that literally just this morning. I'm like, what do you need? Like, how can I support you? And we were talking about like rearranging the house and doing things just to create a little more space and just a little more of a flow for us in our home,
Mhm.
because I'm like, I think we've just outgrown like this area for this thing. And sometimes people think your life is just set it and forget it. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. I'm such a structured person. I mean, I went from like being in school systems as a student straight to teaching in school systems. So,
Right.
like I had my whole year planned out, not even if I wanted it, but because the calendar was laid out. So I got
Yeah.
so used to that. Um, that's been kind of also an unraveling of being a parent is, as you said, like there are just more expectations because life is busier and there's more responsibilities than I had before being a parent. So as you said, like I was already taking initiative planning our social life or things like that, like, but now it's like I have that meant with that dynamic that I'm taking on all these other things with being the parent of like, you know, I don't know, all the checkups for her or whatever. And I just feel like if we don't if we don't make space to understand those things, I think that's where so much conflict can come in because we're not we're not making room to feel fully expressed. And that's when we feel stifled or resentful, is because we don't feel permission to be who we are, which comes back to that like original belief of too of myself, like, who am I now that I'm this parent? I feel like a puppet. I don't feel like myself because, I'm supposed to lose myself in parenting and love every minute of it.
Mhm.
And I feel like these conversations are so important for that very reason, because we all, whatever someone's parenting life looks like, we need to get curious about, is it what we really want? And if it isn't, like, what can we change? Because we can't change everything. And there are things that we don't have control over. And I think that part of parenting has been so interesting for me, because I can't rely on a schedule. I can't rely on these things. Like, life is going to happen. And if something's been something I can rely on the past 2 years, is that we're all sick all the time since someone goes to part-time daycare, like, that is not something I plan for or enjoy,
Right.
but I think that can be a gift, like when you're not in the middle of the pain of that,
Right.
to see like, this is building resilience, and I get to show my daughter who I want to be. Like, I feel like parenting is this exercise in self-help,
Yes.
personal development, like, who's the person I really want to be, and how do I get to show her that? How do I step into that person so I can make her feel more fully expressed as she grows up? Like, that's maybe a pressure I put too much on myself for, but I'm really curious and passionate around.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell us the answer to that. Who are you, Carrie?
I mean, this is it, right? Like, you can't just put one label on something. And I think that's one reason, I say artist before mother in my head. Like, my initial reaction is, I'm an artist first, and then I'm this mother, wife, dog mom, friend, family member. And I think more people need to feel permission that it doesn't have to be mother or parent first. And that doesn't mean anything about the love or dedication you have to your family.
That's beautiful. Tell all the listeners where we can connect with you and get involved with all the great things that you are doing.
Yeah, I would love people to participate specifically in the Instagram account with the form there. So it's at primary underscore caregiver underscore art. So it's a little long, but if you look up Carrie Brummer art, that's another account I have just for my personal artist practice. It's linked there as well. And there's a form under the primary caregiver account where you can anonymously fill out and answer that question so that I can share your answers in community. And if you're interested in potentially joining me, I'm looking for grant funding right now to help with the community embroidery kind of coming together art project. There is an opportunity for you to just DM me on the Carrie Brummer Art Instagram or the Primary Caregiver, and I can keep you posted.
That's beautiful. Well, I totally appreciate you being here with me today. We had a wonderful conversation. And for all of our listeners, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you learned a lot. Listen to it again and take notes. And I'll talk to everybody soon.
Okay,